Well, John, thank you very much for those very, very kind words. Mr. Chancellor, Madam President, members of the graduating class, faculty, and guests. Well, just like all of you who are receiving degrees from Carleton today, I'm delighted to be here. Like you, I take my degree in some ways as recognition of attainments, yours in your programs, mine in some other areas of life. But I'm honored for other reasons as well, reasons which we all share. We are all receiving degrees from a truly distinguished and unusual institution. I'd like to take just a few minutes, if I might, before you receive your degrees to explain what I mean. For while all universities can claim to be distinct in some ways, Carleton is absolutely unique in its origins and in the implications of those origins for the university that we know today. Those origins are beautifully described in a book called Creating Carleton, a history of its early years by the great Canadian historian and Carleton University Professor Emeritus Blair Neatby, and by our wonderful University Secretary Emeritus Donald McEwen. They tell us that Carleton is the only university founded in Ontario in the 70 years from 1887 to 1957. It's the only existing university in Canada which was founded purely by a community movement and with absolutely no support from either church or state. Its origins lie in the basement of the old Ottawa YMCA on Metcalfe Street, in the minds of community leaders, and perhaps most of all, in the unremitting work of our first president, Henry Marshall Tory, a man who led our founding in 1942 at the remarkable age of 77. He did so after founding what were to become the University of British Columbia, the University of Victoria, the University of Alberta, and after being president of the National Research Council. With single-minded determination and a lot of community support, Tory set out in 1942 to ensure that Ottawa had a non-sectarian college and that young people who flooded into Ottawa as part of the war effort and the veterans who would return to Ottawa after the war would be able to complete their university degrees. Fully 2/3 of the 500 students in that first year at Carleton were women, many of whom had come to Ottawa in war-related jobs, and it's a percentage of women which has never been matched by this university or any other one in Canada since. As a bit of an aside, the famous Carleton University of Ottawa rivalry, which you've all come to know and love, and I love as well, results from that time, in part from now long dead religious rivalry. Quite simply, Carleton was avowedly non-sectarian, while University of Ottawa was strongly Roman Catholic. In fact, after the original Board of Governors approved Carleton's motto, that's the motto that's on the front of your Convocation programs, ours the task eternal. It always made me kind of tired to think of it, but there it is. After the Board of Governors approved Carleton's motto, the chair of the board, who was Harry Southam, who was the publisher and owner of the Ottawa Citizen, straightened up in his seat and said, "The real motto of Carleton is, to hell with the Pope." Well, even without the help of the Pope or the Government of Ontario, Carleton College, as it was then known, opened for business on September 1st, 1942. It had no buildings, no library, no facilities whatsoever of its own. But it did have those 500 students, an enthusiastic, if small, faculty, and a powerful will to survive. The latter, the powerful will to survive, came in handy in its first 7 years, for in those first 7 years it received no government support. It was financed wholly by fees and by donations. Its classrooms were borrowed from the Ottawa Collegiate Institute, and the entire Carleton University Library consisted of a guarantee from the Ottawa Public Library to stock 3 copies of each compulsory text for each course. Fees, this will make everybody envious, but fees for students at that time were $10 per course. Faculty, I say turning to faculty, and in the context, of course, of collective bargaining, faculty received $2.50 an hour of classroom time, no time for preparation. But I can't talk too loudly about that because the salary of the president of Carleton University for the first 6 years was $0. In 1946, Carleton moved to its new building, which was the old Ottawa Ladies' College at First Avenue and Lyon Street, and it had its first convocation, 1946. It had a graduating class, your predecessors, of 3 bachelors of journalism and 3 bachelors of public administration. Well, actually, it sort of graduated its first class. In fact, until 1942, it had no provincial charter permitting it to grant degrees, but it did so anyway. Fortunately, so great was Henry Marshall Torrey's reputation that other universities accepted Carleton degrees, in effect because he said they were good degrees. Carleton College was given degree-granting authority in 1952, and it was formally made a university in 1957, so all of you here today can breathe a sigh of relief. Even though Dr. Torrey is long departed, your degrees will be legal. Henry Marshall Torrey died in office in 1947 at the age of 83 and in full flight. For its first 5 years, he, the community leaders who supported him, that small devoted faculty and staff, and the 500 or so students wear the college. Now, I've described those early years in some detail because even 67 years later, their influence echoes throughout our classes, laboratories, and tunnels. This is still a community enterprise. Its tradition is simply, we can do it, and if we have to do it alone, we'll do it by ourselves. The campus on which we're celebrating right now was mostly purchased by a brave board of governors in the early 1950s, out from under the nose of the National Capital Commission, and over the strident objections of the mayor of Ottawa, who at that time was Charlotte Whitten. Where other universities were given campuses by governments, we acquired ours in spite of governments. The first 3 buildings on this campus were built on a shoestring, something that any of you who've suffered through seminars in the post-filled rooms at Patterson Hall will appreciate. The famous tunnels, which are unique among universities, were simply an expansion of heating pipe tunnels. Carleton has survived repeated bouts of financial hardship, most often caused by the nature of its origins and by the Government of Ontario's reluctance to adequately fund any of the universities in Ontario. But its community origins and its can-do attitude have fostered a not always perfectly comfortable tradition of what I would call very loud civility, in which we often debate matters at the top of our lungs and in full public view before coming to conclusions which, far more often than not, respect the best interests of the institution. Carleton, you will know, graduates, has never been a self-satisfied, not always even an overly comfortable place. But after all, it has become a great teaching and research institution, one from which you and I are rightly proud to graduate. Now, I'd like to conclude briefly, if I may, just with a few words about my part in all of this. As Dr. Shepherd pointed out, I started at Carleton in 1958, literally wearing a freshman beanie cap and surviving initiation festivities which probably would not be tolerated today, but were a lot of fun. There were 800 of us full-time students. There were about 40 full-time faculty, and we were in the midst of the move to this campus. I have 2, well actually now 3, degrees from Carleton. My father studied here, my sister has 2 Carleton degrees, I met my wife, who's a BA 1965, here, and my daughter has a Carleton Master of Journalism degree. As John said, I taught here for 10 years, interspersed with my time in government, and I teach here now. And yes, I was fortunate enough to be president for 9 years. So all told, I've been associated with Carleton, closely associated, for 51 of its 67 years. As John Shepherd has pointed out, Carleton University was not... As John Shepherd pointed out, Carleton University was not in great shape when I became president in 1996. We faced a devastating combination of provincial grant cuts and enrollment declines. And it's fair to say that when I took the job, in spite of what Dr. Shepherd said, I didn't have the faintest idea what I was getting into. Since things have actually turned out pretty well in the end, after all, you're all here and graduating today, that leads me to my first lesson. Don't always look too closely before you leap. If you do, you'll miss some of life's best opportunities and experiences. Or as a very favorite songwriter of mine says, this Guy Clark says, be one of those who know that life is just a leap of faith. So spread your arms and hold your breath and always trust your cape. My second and last lesson is that you can't do it yourself. Unless you write poetry or novels, and quite probably not even then, what you accomplish will always be accomplished through and with others. During my time as president, I was blessed, as you graduates have been, with a committed faculty and a great university staff, the same people who've helped you to your degrees. I also had over that time brilliant and hardworking vice presidents, Spruce Reardon, Stuart Adam, Duncan Watt, John Ap Simon, Feridun Hamdalapur, and Alan Harrison, all of whom were willing to work endlessly and well for you and for Carleton. I also had a great personal assistant, Pam Mallon, who's with us today, who made my life far easier while also making the ceremonial life of this institution work as it should. This kind of support has been there in every job I've ever had, or at least the ones where I've accomplished anything. And I guarantee to you graduating today that the same will be true for you. I want to end with the words of one of my predecessors, Claude Bissell, who was our president in 1958 when I started at Carleton, and later went on to be president of the University of Toronto for 14 years. His advice to graduates was the same as mine is now to you. Risk more than you think is safe. Care more than others think is wise. Dream more than others think is practical, and expect more than others think is possible. For you graduates, whom I congratulate for your achievements, and for Carleton University, the university I love, there could be no better advice. Thank you.